Yo, what's going on, everybody? And I know this week I didn't come in with that fire intro music, but I still wanted to get my short out this week and let y'all know about one of the quarterbacks that you should be looking at throughout the fantasy playoffs. And I know it's not typically a sexy pick, and from a streaming perspective, we normally look at guys that are going to provide not just talent through the air, but also that rushing mobility on the ground. Think about Taysom Hill. Justin Fields is an excellent example for this week going up against Minnesota. I think he should be one of the top streaming options for the weekend. But looking throughout the rest of the playoffs, so weeks 15, 16, and 17, one of the teams that has one of the best schedules is the San Francisco 49ers. And then, of course, Jimmy Garoppolo being the guy that's going to be under center. And for Jimmy Garoppolo, and for all of his faults, and for the fact that we've always wanted Trey Lance to be the guy for the 49ers, I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo has played well. I mean, he's had 15 or more fantasy points in 6 of his last 7 games. I mean, since week 9, and that was about the time where George Kittle came back to the lineup from his injured reserve stint. Also, we saw Brandon Ayuk start to be more of a full-time player within an offense. Jimmy Garoppolo has been not just efficient, but also productive as a quarterback. And so I think one of the big things that have folks hung up about not really rostering Jimmy Garoppolo, other than the rushing, is just the 49ers offensive philosophy as a whole. They have been more of a run-first offense. So I wanted to kind of walk through the way that they've been operating so far throughout this back end of the season and what we can hope for from a numbers perspective. So let's pull up a couple of charts right here. And I want to thank somebody that had this in one of the comments last week. And let me pull off the overlay so y'all can see the entire chart. But looking at their pass rate over expectations, the 49ers PROE is one of the statistics I typically use. And of course, you can see throughout the earlier parts of from week 9 on, yes, after we saw George Kittle come back, Elijah Mitchell also being a larger part of that offense, their pass rate over expectation did dip into the minus 20%. So they're actually rushing more than we expected. But as you see here, this trend from weeks 12 through 14, especially in last week's matchup against the Bengals, which as a Cincinnati fan took years off my life, but it's over with. All right, I'm going to try and get past it. Hopefully we can bang out a couple more wins and get into the playoffs. But we start to see this upward trend for Jimmy G in terms of his pass rate over expectation, because we've seen George Kittle have over 130 yards passing over the past couple of weeks. We've seen Brandon Ayuk. He was essentially their savior this past week, which kept them in the win column for the week 14. So on top of that, on top of the fact that not only does he have the heightened pass rate over expectation, they've also got the continued work like in the red zone as well. I mean, so if we look at also their red zone passing rate, so seeing that continue to pick up or at least trend in the right direction, Jimmy Garoppolo has now thrown like 2 or more passing touchdowns in multiple games, like since that week 9 time frame. So I think like overall, seeing what he's capable of doing, like seeing that he's able to not just operate that offense like under Kyle Shanahan, the way Kyle Shanahan designs it, but also in a way that's productive for fantasy. We're not just seeing, while Deebo Samuel has been not just a wide receiver, but a running back one over the past few weeks, Jimmy Garoppolo has still been able to get in on some of the action, as we've seen those passes to George Kittle, as we've seen those passes to Brandon Ayuk, and even Juwan Jennings and some of the ancillary players as well. So I think the big thing, though, to take a note of is what they have moving forward and who they have to play against like over the next like few weeks. And looking at their upcoming schedules, they've got Atlanta, they've got Tennessee, and they've got Houston. Atlanta and Tennessee, like they are both in the bottom 12 in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position. And I think that really sets up well for Jimmy G. And then, of course, the week 17 matchup against Houston. Now, it's funny enough. So Houston is actually 6th in schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed. And we don't really think about them as being a tough matchup for quarterbacks. So really, they're not. We just saw a Russell Wilson score 21.2 fantasy points against them. But if you look at the other passers that have come before them, of course, folks would just take the totals, their fantasy totals, and look at them and say, oh, yeah, well, if you average up the last few totals and then you look at how quarterbacks have performed, you would think that Houston is a tough matchup. But let's walk through. Let's contextualize this like real quick. So 2 weeks ago, before Russell Wilson came to town, it was Carson Wentz, who only scored 11.2 fantasy points. That's the same week that Jonathan Taylor went for 143 yards and 2 touchdowns. Before that, it was Zach Wilson. Before that, it was Ryan Tannehill without any pass catchers. Before that, it was Jacoby Brissett. So you can see the list of, let's say, dysfunctional offenses that have come to Houston or played against Houston, but the last functional offense, couple of functional offenses to play against them. Matthew Stafford, who scored 24.2 points. And this is go back like a few more weeks like prior to, but you can get the idea that a offense that is one functional, two has healthy personnel, they can wind up scoring quite a few fantasy points. So I like Jimmy Garoppolo for the foreseeable future. While he doesn't offer the same upside as most rushing quarterbacks do, the personnel we like. We like George Kittle. We like Brandon Ayuk. We like Deebo Samuel. If we like all of those players, we should like Jimmy Garoppolo. And I also like Jimmy Garoppolo to be the one to carry you throughout the fantasy playoffs. So with that, good luck to y'all. Stay safe out there, and I'll catch y'all later. Peace.